I'm Andrew Francis, and we're going to continue looking at Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, particularly at the incarnational implications of this passage. Not only has there been a failure on the part of the church to understand mission as an essential aspect of its true nature, but likewise the loss of an appreciation of the implications of the incarnation of Christ has also impacted how the church has sought to express itself missionally. Hirsch and Frost give the example of a full-fledged denominational church with all its associated Western-style liturgies, symbolic system and worldview being birthed in the middle of Africa as an obvious expression of the church's failure in many missional contexts to express the intrinsically incarnational nature of the Christian faith. This failure to be incarnational in mission is the more traditional understanding, i.e. going overseas and starting churches in foreign countries, also applies to the church's failure to express itself incarnationally in reaching out to people missionally at home within its own city or country, as Chester and Timmis point out. Moynihan argues that the traditional approach to evangelism is expressed within the current church when it asks how people can be encouraged to belong to what is already there. Hirsch and Frost also state that 95% of Western churches operate in a non-incarnational mode of mission. They describe this understanding of church in similar terms to Moynihan, but use the word attractional as a way of describing the modus operandi of such churches. Instead of seeing their mission as best being expressed by the church incarnating itself within a community or culture, the attractional or traditional church believes that the task of the church missionally is to bring people out of their world and culture into the life of the church, wherein they will have the opportunity to experience God's love in the midst of God's people and hear His word. They hope through such an encounter people will leave behind their former life and world and enter into a new life within the confines of the church. It is significant that Bosch believes that whilst Matthew is writing as a Jew to a predominantly Jewish Christian community, he tells us that the entire purpose of his writing was to nudge his community toward a missionary involvement within its environment. Further to this, and I think of some significance in terms of how the church continues to read Matthew and use Matthew's Great Commission as a motivator for its present mission, Bosch expresses concern that certainly amongst Protestant missionaries of the last 2 centuries, this pericope cannot be properly understood in isolation from the Gospel of Matthew as a whole. Whilst I'm not attempting to offer such a thoughtful analysis of mission in Matthew's Gospel as Bosch provides, nonetheless, I wonder as to whether separating the commands of Jesus to go and make disciples of nations in Matthew 28 from the expression of mission found in the incarnation of Jesus further exacerbates the style of mission found in the more traditional or attractional and Christendom models described. As Bosch further points out, despite the fact that the basic argument of his book has been that from the very beginning, the missionary message of the Christian church incarnated itself in the life and world of those who had embraced it. It is, however, only fairly recently that this contextual nature of the faith has been recognized. If we take seriously the incarnation as providing a model for a missional church, not only will the church be much slower to condemn many aspects of culture, as it was wont to do in some of its missionary endeavors in the past, but it will be much quicker to take time to learn and understand the culture or subcultures which it finds itself living within. An example of this cultural confusion is found in Christian marriages in India, in which brides are expected to wear white. In a traditional Hindu wedding, the bride would wear red. The white dress may find some significance in the book of Revelation, but my suspicion is it is simply a matter of what Western missionaries have taught. The church needs to be enfleshed and embodied in a people and its culture. And again, to quote Bosch, in this paradigm, it is not so much a case of the church being expanded, but of the church being born anew in each context and culture. Whilst I'm sure that the gospel will indeed challenge certain cultural assumptions and practices, nonetheless, we also need to be careful that what is being challenged flows out of a careful consideration of what incarnation might look like for a church in a particular setting. It still strikes me as strange when I visit India and see the majority of pastors wearing long black trousers and white shirts, something they've been encouraged to do following the pattern of dress of former Western missionaries. Whilst there is no doubt much impact by Western culture evidencing itself in the dress of many Indians, particularly in the larger cities, still many men, and Indian pastors are mainly men, continue to wear more traditional Indian dress, as do most of the ladies. I was even more disturbed to see photos of celebrations of Christmas by Christians with a Santa Claus wearing a white face mask and a red Coca-Cola-inspired Santa suit. Sadly, the confusion of culture and Christianity for many non-Western Christians has not only led to a diminution of the appreciation of their own culture, and thereby an unnecessary separation between Christians and others in their surrounding society, but also an unhelpful embrace of Western cultural symbols and traditions under the assumption that somehow they are inherently Christian. As cultural anthropologist Charles Kraft explains, God works through culture. He does not oppose whole cultural systems. A position that sees it necessary for people to replace their cultural worldview with something called a Christian worldview does not really understand the scriptures. God is not against culture in this way, though he has plenty to say in opposition to many socio-cultural beliefs and practices. Whilst developing a more incarnational ecclesiology might in some cases make it easier for Christians in places like India and Africa to share the good news of Jesus with others in their societies, nonetheless, I suspect that one of the reasons why many Christians in the West remain committed to Christendom and attractional understandings of church is the potential cost involved in seeking to be more incarnational. Michael Frost expresses poignantly something of this cost. Embodiment is costly in a way that excarnate forms of religious faith are not. As the people of the incarnate one, we must allow that central miracle to shape our lives, recognizing that incarnation came at great personal cost to God, that it required of him a descent in brokenness and a reascent into glory, and that it must be embodied in a similar costly fashion in our churches today. I remember when I first started considering spending time in a gay bar. It was quite scary choosing to hang out in a place where I knew no one and had little idea regarding how to introduce myself to people. It took much time and a lot of listening before I could find a place and acceptance in the community. After a number of years, I was asked to start a Bible study by some of the guys. I was now given a voice and an opportunity to share something of my faith. Of course, it was much easier spending time with other Christians in a church context where everyone shares similar values, beliefs, and worldview than in a situation where all that you hold sacred, or I should say much that you hold sacred and base your life on, is open fodder for questioning and challenging. As Christ left the glory of heaven to enter the messiness of our humanity, along with the vulnerability of being born into a poor, politically powerless family so that the revelation of the true nature of God could be expressed, inevitably, as Christians seeking to express an incarnational ecclesiology, thought must also be given to how we too can leave behind something of the comfort of the culture and world we know in order to expose ourselves to the discomfort and vulnerability of communities and cultures we don't know, in order that Christ might somehow be revealed to them. This is to be both incarnational and missional. Whilst The Trellis and the Vine by Colin Marshall and Tony Payne recognises many of the difficulties that will be faced by most churches at a structural level if they are to implement the much more missional focus being suggested in their book, nonetheless, I still remain concerned over the willingness of the authors to embrace so much of present church structures without asking questions concerning the helpfulness of such structures in the ongoing mission of the church. Chapter 8 of their book, titled Why Sunday Sermons Are Necessary But Not Sufficient, presents something of the blind spots concerning structure that are evident throughout the book. There is, firstly, no questions raised concerning why it is that God's people need to be meeting together on Sundays. Secondly, whilst the role of pastor is analysed and looked at from three different perspectives, i.e. pastor as clergyman, pastor as CEO, and pastor as trainer, nowhere is the concept of ordination questioned, and nowhere is the one-man concept of leadership challenged. Likewise, nowhere is the Reformation understanding of the role of the sermon called into question, and nowhere is the concept of a regular gathering of believers meeting together on a Sunday under the tuition of a person designated as pastor questioned. When we start with the incarnation as a basis for our ecclesiology, all of these things must be brought into question. This doesn't mean that we of necessity do away with all of these things. It is simply that we don't presume that what we know and experience of church is our starting place. If we as the people of God understand that we are a missional people, then we may question the helpfulness of meeting on Sunday. Why not meet on a Monday or any other day? Further to this, we might ask, what time is most accessible to those who we are living and working amongst? The setting in which we meet and even how large our meetings are would be considered. Our meetings would need to be determined more by the needs of the people to whom we are seeking to incarnate the presence and word of Christ to than the structures, demands, or traditions of the denomination or church we are part or have known. If the people we are reaching out to are unlikely to respond to a culturally strange lengthy monologue that we call a sermon, then why persist with it? And why not consider more didactic approaches to message conveyance? Felicity Dale writes, research shows that people remember only about 20% of what they hear, 50% of what they see and hear, but 70% of what they say themselves. When people share what they see for themselves in the scriptures, they are learning more effectively than when they passively sit back and listen. And whilst there is a good emphasis on sending out gospel workers by Marshall and Payne, people who are trained and prepared to share the message of Jesus with those who they work with and relate to, there still seems to be an expectation that eventually those who are reached and responsive to the gospel will be incorporated back into the church structure that is, even if that structure itself is not assumed to be normative.